Nothing riles up the audience more than talking about an amazing graphics card that you just can't buy. That, of course, being the RTX 3080. But today, we're not going to talk about the RTX 3080. No. We're going to talk about one of the most anticipated cards of the year, the NVIDIA VHS tape. Or the Super S. It's a 3070. The new P360A joins the Phanteks family of ultra-fine performance mesh gaming PC chassis featuring optimal aesthetics and airflow at an affordable price. The P360A is the perfect size for both water cooling and air cooling, with support of up to EATX motherboards and multiple 240 or 280 radiators, while dedicated cable management compartment with Velcro straps take the guesswork out of cable routing. To see the complete list of specs and available colors of the all-new P360A from Phanteks, visit the link in the description below. So let's start with a physical tour of the card, which is actually the most exciting part to me because there were some things that I didn't expect on the 3070 until I got my hands on it and got to unbox it. First of all, it's not the exact same color of a 3080, and I don't know how well this is gonna pick up on camera. The 3080 has a bit of a bronzy look to it, but if you compare the color of a 3070 right next to it, it's more gunmetal. So if I go like this, it's definitely got more of a blue in it, where there's definitely a little bit more of like a brown in the 3080. I like this color, I really do. I kind of wish all three of them were the same. I don't know if this is a variant maybe in manufacturing, but this is the color ours ended up being. The backplate, as you can see, has got the nice, it is a plastic backplate, by the way. It's not metal. And it's got the grooved lines in there, which look really nice. But as you can see right here, that I did not expect until I took it out of the box, is that it does share the pass-through blower style, just like you find on the 3080 and the 3090. When you look at it from this perspective, it really does look like a VHS tape, but I digress. This, we thought was just gonna be a standard dual axial fan, but no, the front fan shares the same blower style, so it's pulling air in and pushing it out, but then you do have the back, pretty much all the air exhausting through the card that can then push up on your RAM and your CPU and stuff. And what initially seemed like a bad idea to many people going, well, that's just gonna heat up your CPU and your RAM, my testing and anyone else who's tested this has seen that it actually lowers the temperature of those components that the air is actually touching. So it's actually a very good byproduct of having this very efficient blow-through design. In terms of I/O, just like the 3080 and the 3090, it does drop the USB-C on the back, but you have 3 DisplayPort and 1 HDMI. I really do wish that these cards had 2 HDMIs, especially if you're using an HDMI virtual reality headset. A lot of them now are using DisplayPort, but it just is always nice to have an extra HDMI for TV out and all that sort of stuff. You're still stuck with the same 12 pin found on the 3080 and the 3090. The difference here is this pin actually terminates into a single 8-pin, unlike the other two which terminate into a dual 8-pin. Don't feel tempted to try using the single 8-pin on a 3080 or a 3090 just to see what happens, okay? I mean, bad things won't necessarily happen, except for the fact that you're gonna be pulling a lot of wattage through that single cable, and it might end up going poof, and then turning into a nice plastic fire. Don't do that, okay? That would be a very bad idea. Let us do it to see what happens, and you don't have to worry about doing it with your stuff. Anyway, moving on. There is no lighting on this card. I mean, at the price point, 500 bucks, I'd like to see this illuminate like the 3080 and 3090 does, where it says GeForce RTX right here. This is just an etch. It does not light up anywhere on the back plate, the face of the card, the back of the card, nowhere. So it is completely dimmed out, if you will. So a lot of people may not care about that. Because it was white LEDs, I feel like it would have worked with any build, but most people probably aren't gonna care. The aesthetics, in my opinion, look so good anyway, that that's really besides the point. Now, comparing it to the RTX 2080, you can see the size difference is pretty noticeable. It's a standard height card, and it's a 2-slot card, and it's gonna fit in many more chassis than even the 2080 would. Now, the 2080 and 2080 Ti Founders Edition cards, being the standard like 11 inches of length, are... The standard length reference / Founders PCB on the 20 series would fit in almost any chassis, but the cool thing about the RTX 3070 being smaller is that opens you up to a lot more options that the 2080 Ti would have probably been a poor choice for a small form factor. One, because of the dual axial fans, that puts a lot of stress on the chassis to try and cool off the GPU. With this being a half blow through style, half exhaust style, means that you could probably use this in a small form factor case and get away with it. And it's probably something we're gonna check in the future, because having a 2080 Ti in an even smaller case like the N case, like the N1 or even the Loki Ghost S1, or any like the Dan case and stuff like that, means this would be a great accent piece to those, especially with the nice gunmetal look. It is a lower wattage card. It's 220 watt TDP versus 250 watt TDP of the 2080 Ti. So when we're checking the claims here and fact checking whether or not NVIDIA was correct at saying it is either on point or slightly faster than a 2080 Ti, consider the fact that it's going to be doing it at less wattage. And that's because of the amperes efficiency improvements over Turing, which were definitely touted during their keynote. Makes sense that it could be a lower watt part, giving you roughly the same performance. It is important to remember too that this is using Gen 2 RT cores versus the 2080 Ti's Gen 1 RT cores. It also has less RT cores than the 2080 Ti. So keep that in mind too when you take a look at these graphs, because the RTX performance is not directly comparable. The last spec worth really mentioning here, because I mean, we could talk about CUDA core counts, we could talk about RT cores, tensor cores. At the end of the day, who cares what the number actually is? The performance at the end of the day is what matters most. But in terms of memory specs though, the 2080 Ti, remember, is 11 gigabytes of GDDR6, 352-bit bus, whereas the 3070 is only 8 gigabytes of GDDR6, running at the same frequency for only 256-bit bus. So it's important to remember when you look at these charts, again, that this is at a disadvantage memory-wise versus the 2080 Ti. Now, I know I've talked more than you guys already want, and plenty of you have probably already time-stamped when the benchmarks start so people can skip all this, but I think it's important that you hear all of this so you understand what you're seeing. Instead of just going, oh, this number's versus this number, it's kind of important to know how you got there and what was different. So Jen Sun said, this guy was gonna be as fast, or even faster than this guy at $500 versus $1,200. $700 less. Was he telling the truth? So in the benchmarks that we run, and it's important to obviously check out more reviews than just ours, because we all have different testing methodologies and you're not going to get the complete story with any one reviewer, no matter how in-depth they try and go. I do my testing starting with synthetic benchmarks, because when you're testing the same brand, like if you're testing NVIDIA cards versus NVIDIA cards, the synthetic benchmarks tend to give you a pretty good indicator of what's to come. So when I start with TimeSpy Extreme, and Port Royal, that's basically giving us DX12 testing and then some ray trace testing right back to back, and it kind of gives me an idea of what to expect. But what's funny is every now and then a game engine will just completely flip it upside down. And that's why we use the games that we do, because they all use different engines, different variations of the engine, older versus newer. That's one of the reasons why we still leave titles like Shadow of the Tomb Raider on. That's a first gen RTX title that came out when the 2080 series or the 20 series first launched back in 2018. And so it tells us a lot at how things have improved when we compare something like Shadow of the Tomb Raider on a new card versus an older card, and then a newer title on an older card versus a newer card. And you can see the generational improvements as the code has gotten more efficient, as the tensor cores have gotten more leveraged and all that sort of stuff. Although in this testing, DLSS is off, except for Metro Exodus RTX testing because it's on by default. It's interesting because you can definitely see where my testing also kind of starts with the older titles and sort of starts working towards the newer ones. And initially, the 3070 was trailing the 2080 Ti. Not by a lot, by like 3 or 4 FPS at times in 4K, and then it kind of held that same 3 or 4 FPS up to 1440, and then it would either be on par or somewhat barely behind the 2080 Ti at 1080p. And the reason why we think that it was trailing behind on the higher resolutions has everything to do, again, with that memory throughput or the bandwidth. 8 gigabytes is the argument now. Is that enough these days? And with all the talk about AMD cards potentially coming out with 16 gigs across the board, you've got to have a fast GPU to obviously complement the memory. But you can tell that that's one of the areas where they saved money on the 3070 was the memory. And that was evident in some of these titles. But as you move down the line, you start testing the newer engines. Some of them, we actually saw a pretty big improvement over the 2080 Ti. Shadow of the Tomb Raider being one of them, which is funny because it's a newer title, but it seems like the newer tensor cores were definitely able to take advantage of the ray trace shadows. Even though it's a first gen RTX title, it really pulled ahead nicely. But it doesn't matter if it was DX12 or RTX, it trades blows with the 2080 Ti. And this is the kind of the part of the job that I hate, is you start reading people's discussions online and the forums and Reddit and all that. People take something and they cling on to it. And then just like a game of telephone, the more it's told, the more it changes. And then you started hearing things like 3070, the 2080 Ti killer. And it's like, no one ever said it's gonna kill the 2080 Ti. I mean, Jen's son going, oh, by the way, it's faster than a 2080 Ti, could definitely be left open to interpretation. Because guess what? If you run a 3.99 quarter second top fuel dragster quarter mile, that's faster than a 3.999. Like 3.990 is faster than 3.999. Is that measurable? Can you see that? Well, I guess visually on the cars you can't. But if you were trying to find the 1 or 2 FPS, maybe that this is slower in some titles and 3 or 4 FPS it's faster in other titles, can you notice that? No, not really. But do you notice the difference in price? Hell yes. $499 MSRP for the Founders Edition card is a hell of a lot better of a price point for the performance that you get than the 2080 Ti ever was. And it holds true to the expectations, in my opinion. If you expected this to be a killer of a card that cost $700 more, or what? I'm not gonna do math on the top of my head, but this is way less percentage-wise than the 2080 Ti costs, and you are getting anywhere between like 97 to 103% of that performance. That's a good deal. Deal with it. But are you gonna be able to buy it? If the 3080 and 3090 launch has taught us anything, it's that he wasn't ready. And by he, I mean any retailer or manufacturing, I guess, because you still cannot go out and just on a whim decide you're gonna buy a 30 series card and go home with it the same day. Heck, you can't even order it really if you want. So NVIDIA is kind of bowing out of the like direct sales game. The only way you can buy a Founders Edition card in North America is through Best Buy or Micro Center in the United States or Best Buy in Canada. And other countries and regions, I'm sorry, I have no idea. I have no idea what the sales of that's gonna be, which I think is unfortunate because the Founders Edition cards this time around are absolutely gorgeous. They are my favorite designs. If you haven't seen my Project Black Ice build, my 3-part series of building my new personal rig around a 3090 Fe, it's the first time I've built myself a non-water-cooled graphics card gaming system in the last like 12 years. So what does that tell you? And speaking of temperatures though, it never got any hotter than 61 degrees Celsius with the fan curve set at a manual 50%. Now it'll hit about 47% with its stock fan curve. So I only upped it 3%, and that is with an open air test bench, so obviously your case cooling will make your results vary. That's everything to do with the lower wattage TDP. 220 watt again versus a 250 watt, and a much better cooler than the arguably pretty, but not so great efficiency of the 20 series FE cooler. So is it exciting or disappointing? Well, I guess it depends on how you heard Jensen's statement. The problem is he said, oh, and it's faster than a 2080 Ti. Well, that holds true in some titles. We've shown that. I heard up to. I always hear up to. I speak marketing. I think up to is a very fair statement. It is definitely up to 2080 Ti speed in almost everything. It's only a few percent behind in the things that it doesn't match it at. And in some games, 2080 Ti does get beaten by this. And I think in a couple titles, it was even double-digit numbers. So with that being the case, it depends on a lot of things. But if you had a realistic expectation of this being a 2080 Ti level graphics card for a significant, $700 less than that card, then you would have a hard time not being excited by this. I bet a lot of you were leery about whether or not you're gonna be able to get your hands on one. Let's hope the extra 2-week delay they added to this card's launch helped with that, which I'm being told did give them an opportunity to ramp up more supply. So yeah, if you wanna get one though, Best Buy or Micro Center in the US, or Best Buy in Canada, rest of the regions, I have no idea. But is it worth it over Big Navi? I have no idea. Big Navi's announcement's tomorrow. So I guess it makes sense that the embargo for this would be live the day ahead, although we'd only be talking hypothetically because we don't have Big Navi cards yet, so we can't directly compare them. But if you are gonna be upgrading from an older Team Green card to potentially this card, well, then, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. If this is your price point, this is the best card you're gonna get right now. But you know new cards are gonna come in the future. It's just the way things are. Versus Big Navi though, I don't know. You need to stay subscribed though, so you can see our coverage on Big Navi, so we can kind of give you the news as we find out about it tomorrow from you watching this video the day it goes live, to try and determine whether or not on paper it looks like it's gonna be a good battle this time around. And I have no reason to believe it won't be, because I think this is going to be like the era of the GTX 680 versus the 7970 graphics card, where AMD was actually beating the 680 pretty much across the board. So there you go, guys. There's our coverage of the 3070. I'm glad to see that it wasn't just a bunch of fanfare, that it actually holds up to the expectations of being a 2080 Ti level graphics card for $499. Sound off down in the comments below how you guys feel about this card. I know the jokes are gonna be flying about availability. That's obvious. There's no reason why those jokes aren't warranted either. It's kind of shown by now that getting your hands on any 30 series card is kind of like winning the lottery at this point. But that's where I'm gonna get out of here. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, we'll see you in the next one. And remember, don't use the single 8-pin connector on a 3080. Bad stuff will probably happen.